Hey, it's Jasper, and if you're in the market for a new high-end webcam, well, this is the video for you. This is actually being recorded on a camera that costs less than $200, and I've got more. I've got the latest from Razer, Elgato, Emeet, Obsbot, and more, and I've been testing them. So you'll see footage from all these across a variety of lighting conditions, and you'll hear their microphones if they have them, plus we'll look at their software, all to help you make an informed buying decision. To kick things off, let's first level set on prices. So these are as of recording in US dollars, but remember that prices do change frequently, so be sure to check the latest. I have included links to all of these in the description, and if you use those links to make a purchase, I'll get a small commission at absolutely no cost to you. Or if these cameras are a bit out of your budget, I have another webcam video, so be sure to check that one out. And then finally, if you want to sign up for deal alerts in any of these cameras, be sure to check out Dip. It's actually the service I built myself, and it just allows me to send you an email if I ever spot a good deal on a camera that you're interested in, so you can buy it when the price dips. But now let's check out the footage. For our first batch of four, we have the Razer Kiyo V2, the Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra, the Elgato Facecam 4K, and the OBSBOT Meet 2. And this is what they look like out of their box with no settings changed in a well-lit room. And also take note of their field of view. They're all about one arm's length away from me, and you'll note that some of them have much wider framing than others, and that can be nice, but that can also mean you'll have to digitally crop in using their included software if you want to have a tighter frame, and then that can reduce the image quality if you're looking for that 4K stream. Also, you'll note I've got some fun goodies back here behind me. I'll get to those in a bit, but now I'm going to use this color calibration card in order to try to improve the image quality on some of these cameras. And there we go. So I used the software provided by each camera manufacturer to tune the image to try to make me look as good and realistic as possible. Plus, I used my trusty iPad basically as a reference monitor, and this is where I ended up. So as you can see, I really did struggle with the Elgato camera. I just really can't get it looking good. So if anyone has any tips, let me know. But now let's see how these cameras handle this pretty dramatic change in lighting. All of their exposures are set to auto, and now the only light in this room is coming from my monitors. And what do you think? How are they doing? And this spinny thing over here is actually a tool for us because it allows us to see if the cameras are dropping any frames. And when that happens, things get really blurry. So if you see a lot of blur on that or my hands when it's dark, then you know the cameras are dropping frames. But now let's look at the video from each individual camera. Now we're going to do a lightning round through each camera so you can see it up close and hear their internal microphone if it has one. This camera has been a bit of a struggle for me because setting the white balance to auto is basically the only way I can get it looking reasonable, but then it is sometimes variable where it will skew more blue and then sometimes it skews more yellow. So if you're wondering why, that explains it. But now let's look at the autofocus and see how that performs. And it does work, it just often takes a bit of time for it to get dialed in. There you go. So not the most impressive showing there, but now let's look at the Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra. And I think I look fantastic on this camera. It does have one quirk though, which is the autofocus, where often it will focus hunt if I move around a little bit and kind of struggles to get locked on my face. That is disappointing, and traditionally what I do is I just turn off autofocus and manually set it to where I'm sitting, and that perfectly solves that problem, but then we wouldn't be able to do fun tests like this. So let's see how it performs. Is it gonna get a lock there? Yep, here we go. It just takes a little while to get there. The other thing to note is that blur that you see in the background, that's actually real from the optics and the lens in this camera. So I find it to be very impressive. It's just the autofocus is a bit quirky. But now let's look at the Elgato Facecam 4K, and this doesn't have a built-in mic, so you're hearing me through my DJI mic 2. And the image here has been a struggle for me. I've spent over an hour trying to dial it in and try different settings, and this is basically the best I can get. I don't know why. It's a bit disappointing for such a nice and modern camera, but here we are. The other thing to note is it doesn't actually have an autofocus at all. It just has a fixed focal length and everything's in focus, where it does work surprisingly well, and it just adjusts the contrast automatically instead. So there you go. But now let's look at the Obsbot Meet 2, and this was one of my top picks for my last video from a performance to value perspective, because honestly, I think this picture looks great. And the other nice thing is I didn't have to do much tuning out of the box to get this. It just kind of looks good without much adjustment and settings. And now we're going to also test the autofocus, and you'll see it's very fast and it works very, very well. So I'm impressed with this camera. I like it a lot. But now we're quickly going to look at the eye chart on all the cameras so you can see how they look when it's zoomed in and focus on those charts. These results aren't that surprising because it basically shows that those wider field of view cameras need to be zoomed in more in order to have the eye chart appear at the equivalent size, and that just reveals there's less resolution per area, which then degrades the image quality. So keep that in mind as you're deciding on which camera you want to choose. And now before we move on to the next batch of 4, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider dropping a like, a comment, or yes, even subscribing. I put a ton of work into these videos and I cover everything from computer speakers to headphones, and I would really appreciate your support. But now let's move on to the next batch. Now we have the YoloCam S3, the Logitech MX Brio, the Emeet S800, and the YoloCam S7. And this is what they all look like out of the box with just their stock settings. But now I'm going to use their manufacturer provided software in order to tweak the image to see if I can get them looking a little bit better. And there we go. And remember, I'm pretty constrained by the adjustments I can make because I'm using the software from the camera manufacturer. So I'm doing the best for the tools at hand. But now let's see how they handle going to a dark room with their exposure set to auto. And here we go. The only light in here is coming from my monitor. What do you think? But now let's look at each camera individually. Of all the cameras in this video, I think the one I'm most excited about is this, the YoloCam S3. I think it represents tremendous value for money because the quality of the image coming out of it is just really, really impressive. And it has decent autofocus as well. So let's just test that really fast. And here we go. So there you go. It works well. Now it does have some quirks. So the light on the front stays on all the time and it does stay a little bit warm even when it's not being used. So I don't love that, but I think the quality of the image coming out of it probably means it's worth making those sacrifices and maybe they can update those issues in the future. But now for our next camera, let's look at the Logitech MX Brio. I'm just having this here as a point of reference. Overall, I think it looks fine. It's a decent camera, but it definitely doesn't look as good as that S3. And here is the autofocus, and there you go. Definitely serviceable. But now let's look at the Emeet S800. And this camera is tricky because it's actually very crisp, as you'll see with the eye charts in just a second, but the colors and the contrast, I've just struggled to get dialed in using its software. But on the good news, it does have a very good autofocus. So if that's important to you, maybe consider it. But now we have the YoloCam S7. And this is an interesting camera because it basically costs the same as that Sony ZV-E10 back there. And a lot of people would probably say, why would you ever get this camera? But if you're looking for a dedicated like streaming camera that plugs into your computer, this is actually like a solid option, and I can see it making sense because you don't need an HDMI capture card, and then you can adjust all of its settings via the included software, so you don't have to screw around with all the settings on the Sony camera, which believe me is very time consuming and very confusing. So it's kind of for a niche audience, but if you're like a professional streamer or something like that, then I could see this camera making sense. But now let's look at the eye chart for these cameras. And it's basically what I'd expect with the two YoloCams looking excellent and the S800 also looking quite sharp. But now let's look at our final batch of 4, where we have the Emeet Pixy, the Insta360 Link2, the Obsbot Tiny 2 Lite, and the Obsbot Tiny 2 Original. And this is what they all look like out of their box with absolutely no tuning. But now let's see if I can make some adjustments to make them look a little bit better. And that's a bit better. And remember, all these cameras have a PTZ, pan tilt zoom mechanism. So if I were to say, get up and then frolic around my room, well, hey, look at that. You can join me along for the ride. Now, I don't think most people need this. It just adds extra cost and complexity for the cameras. However, maybe you're a yoga instructor or a dancer, or maybe you make some spicy content and need some good angles. Not my business, but these cameras all offer this functionality. So now let's look at each one individually. Oop, actually, I almost forgot. We're going to do a quick low light test to see how these all handle a very dark room. So there we go. What do we think? Okay, now let's look at each camera individually. This is the Emeet Pixy, and overall, I think it looks fine. There's some noise in the image, and if you look at the skin of my face, it's a little blown out and lacking detail, and this is not some beauty mode, it's just the way the camera naturally looks. But now let's test the autofocus, and as you can see, it is very fast, and that's because this camera has that second lens on there to help it with that. So not a bad camera at all, but now let's look at the Insta360 Link2. And overall, I think this is a good camera. I think the image looks quite nice, and the autofocus is very impressive. Just look how fast my buddy Abe comes into focus. So good work there. They didn't even need a second lens to do that. So very impressive. But now let's check out the Tiny 2 Lite. And this is my favorite PTZ camera of the bunch, just because I think it looks really good and natural and doesn't require much tuning out of the box in order to get it there. Plus, it has a really reasonable price, and its autofocus is quite impressive as well. So let's see. And voila, there is my good pal George just crushing it in focus. So now let's move on to its bigger brother. This is a Tiny 2 original, and it has a larger image sensor than on the Lite version, and the image does look really good, but typically the cost is quite a bit higher as well. So definitely a trade-off there. But now let's check the autofocus, and there you go, nice and fast. So now let's look at the eye chart for all these cameras. And looking at these images, the two that I like the best are from Obsbot, but that doesn't really surprise me because they have a strong history of putting good sensors in their cameras. But now let's talk about the software I've been using to tune these cameras. And just to level set on where I'm coming from, I'm the sort of guy that doesn't want to have to keep on using the software for my webcam. So I'll happily use it once when I first get it to set it up and get it looking good in my environment. But after that, I don't want to have to think about it because so many of these companies have software that start every time you open your computer and bother you and want you to use virtual cameras that inevitably use up all your system resources. And for me, that's just not what I'm looking for. I want software that is simple enough so that anyone can really use it, powerful enough so I can make the adjustments that I need to, and then quiet enough to just know to get out of the way and let me use my camera the way I want to use it. And it's surprising, but the software I actually find myself liking the best is for the YoloCams, and I like it just because it's quite powerful, where I can go in there and make all the adjustments that I could ever want to white balance, exposure, autofocus, you name it, it's all there. But then I can save those settings to the camera, close the software, and just move on with my life. And every time I start my computer, I don't get asked to open the software. I don't have any weird beauty filters or virtual cameras, and I don't want any of that stuff. I just want a good looking camera, and that's exactly what YoloCam's built that software around. So props to them for doing that. Overall, I'm really impressed. And to be clear, this is also not a sponsored review or anything like that. No one's paying me. I just have been using this camera for the last month or so, and I really like what I'm seeing. So if one end of the spectrum is YoloCam with powerful but unobtrusive software, the other end is probably Razer. And I say this with love because I really do like a lot of their products. However, their software is just the king of bloat. You install that one package manager and oh man, so much more comes along with it. And I'm just really not a fan. I will say once you get in there and you finally get to the part where you can adjust your cameras, like overall it's powerful and I can do what I need to do. So it's fine. However, I just don't love how much other stuff comes along with it. The other software that I'm not the biggest fan of for a different reason is the Emeet software, and it's just really not confidence inspiring. It doesn't feel polished or refined. It is serviceable and gets the job done, but I'm not the biggest fan of it. And then the Insta360 and the Obsbot software, overall, it's quite intuitive and it works quite well on both. The one thing I'll say here though is that they both have a pretty heavy reliance on virtual cameras for any of those extra features. So if you think you're going to use your beauty modes or all that other fun stuff, get prepared to have that virtual camera running, which more often than not will really destroy your system resources and probably cause your computer to run pretty poorly. So there you go. That's what I think of all the software. So to close this out, I'm giving you a bit more time with the S3, but this time under some trickier lighting conditions where I have turned off all the lights in the room and then I have the windows on the side open, and this is how it's handling this lighting condition. And overall, I think it's doing a really good job. Now, on that note, I'll say lighting is one of the most important things you can do to get a webcam looking good. So I personally like the Elgato Key Lights because they have a high color rendering index, CRI, and the light quality is really good. They also are Wi-Fi enabled, so then I can use them with my Stream Deck. So I'm a fan of that, but even like a cheap ring light can really go a long way. But hopefully you found this video helpful. I'm going to try to make this a recurring series, so anytime some new or interesting webcams come out, I'll do like webcam wars and we can see how they all compare. Be sure to like and subscribe and comment, all that fun stuff if you like what I'm doing. I really appreciate your support, and I'm trying to get to 100,000 subs, so we'll see how that goes. Also, don't forget about Dip if you want to get deal alerts on any of these cameras. And until then, I will see you on the next one.